second-year PhD student in the School of Psychological Sciences, and today I'm just going to be giving kind of an overview of my PhD and what questions to ask. So the overview of the talk, I'm going to introduce some core concepts, namely learning, pain, and placebo analgesia. And then be telling you kind of what my research question is and what's my plan to answer that question. Finally, I'll be talking about some of the applications of this work. So we are in a constantly changing environment, and we have to navigate this environment and be very flexible in how we respond to new things. And we do this by making predictions about what we think will happen on a constant basis. When we get these predictions wrong, we update them, and this happens in the brain by a prediction error, which is a dopamine signal signaling to the anterior cingulate cortex of the brain. And this updates our expectations, so next time something happens, we'll be more accurate at what we expect. So one example could be if we're crossing a busy road and suddenly out of nowhere a car comes. That would be surprising to us, and we produce a prediction error signal in the brain, and this means next time that we cross that road, we'll be looking out for traffic. Or if we were at a conference and we weren't expecting it, but somebody came up to us and came to shake our hand and introduce themselves, we were surprised next time we're in that environment, we expect it to happen, and we'd adapt our behaviour to meet it. So you can actually measure this prediction error signal using a technique called electroencephalography, which I use. You might have heard of it as EEG. Basically, you put a kind of swimming cap on the head and plug electrodes into that swimming cap. And that measures the electrical potentials produced by the brain, and it translates into a plot like this. So along the x-axis of this plot is time in milliseconds, and along the y-axis is amplitude in microvolts, going from positive to negative. So that grey line is where the unexpected event happens. And you can see at around 250 milliseconds afterwards, there's this peak, and that's called the FRN, or the feedback rate of negativity. That's the prediction error signal that I'm interested in. And the FRN is conventionally thought in the literature to signal the difference between a win and a loss. So, for example, if you lost somebody during gambling, you produce a more negative FRN, which you can see depicted on the dotted line there. So, prediction error is a really important concept and a really core function of our brain. Another really important function of our brain is actually pain. So when we think of pain, we think of the sensory aspect of it. So if we stuck our hand on the hob by mistake, we'd go ow, and it would be painful. But pain has more, it's more than that, it has more of a purpose. So pain is there to motivate us. So if we feel that burning pain, we retract our hand very quickly from the hob or whatever, and this is to motivate us to escape from the damaging situation and avoid further injury. Another driver that pain has is actually to push us to seek help. So if we bent our hand on the hob, we might go, ow, this really hurts, and somebody else might help us to put it under a cold tap or whatever. And these are all kind of like adaptive functions of pain that help us to survive. Pain is also modulated by many things. So firstly, emotion. If we're feeling very anxious and we experience pain, that pain will be much worse than if we're feeling very calm and relaxed about the pain. Our expectations also modulate pain. So if you're expecting pain to be low or not to be bad, everything's going to be okay, and you have a pain stimulus, you'll experience this extremely differently to if you're expecting it to be very painful and stressful. And finally, this concept called salience. So this is, if you're interpreting pain as a very motivational, important and attention-grabbing thing, and something that could be very dangerous to you, then again, that will seem a lot worse than if you're not really paying attention to it. So two really important functions of the brain, learning and pain. And placebo analgesia actually somehow changes both of these core functions. So when I'm talking about placebo analgesia, I'm talking about believing that you've had a pain-relieving medication and actually experiencing the pain is less because of this. So pain perception is reduced and learning is disrupted, because if you go back to the prediction error that I was talking about, in a placebo setting, you're expecting low pain, and despite the incoming high pain stimulus, you still perceive the pain as low. You don't update your expectations in the way that you should. So, this is a very clinical faculty, so a lot of people will think of placebo as something that you need to control in a clinical trial. But actually it's also really interesting experimentally, because it can tell us a lot about how the brain functions, and it demonstrates the power of our expectations on perception. So what's really interesting is how do our expectations actually change our pain perception? And a lot of people have done research into this. It's a big research area, and this is kind of like the standard paradigm that you use. So you give a person 30 laser courses, and you give that a 7 out of 10 level of pain. You then apply just an inert, inactive cream to where the laser was, and you tell them, okay, this might have a painkilling effect. You then, covertly and sneakily, reduce the laser intensity down to, say, like a 3 out of 10, so something not particularly painful. And this leads the participants to believe that they've received an analgesic cream. And then if you actually increase the laser courses back to the original level of 7 out of 10, they will perceive that pain as a low pain still. And really interestingly, this translates into these kind of plots. So on the left-hand side, you can see just behavioural pain rating. So you can see before pre-treatment, the dark block, the average pain rating is 6 out of 10. And then after treatment, it just went down to 4 out of 10. But this is where it gets really interesting, because you can measure the brain activation and how pain-related brain activation changes in the brain. So the plot on the right is an EEG plot in response to a laser pulse. And the black line is pre-placebo treatment, and the red line is post-placebo treatment. So you can see that actually the whole brain activation signal reduces in amplitude after simply expecting that you've had a placebo treatment. So this leads me on to my research question. A lot of research has measured pain ratings, pain signals, all of these things to try and understand what is happening under placebo analgesia. I want to take a new approach to this and actually look at this learning signal, the FRM, because our updating of predictions, this really important function, is somehow being altered or interrupted under placebo analgesic paradigm. So what I want to do, I've shown you these two plots before, but I kind of want to put them together again. So I want to be looking at the learning signal on the right, but within a laser paradigm. And so how am I going to implement this? Well, the study that I'm running at the moment is actually, before I do anything else, try and characterise this learning signal a little bit better. Because although I said at the start it signals the difference between like a win and a loss, this is actually being questioned now, and it might be signalling the motivational salience of an outcome. So that's something that I'm investigating at the moment. My hypothesis for this is that actually FRM will be modulated by both salience and valence. My second study, which will start in January, is investigating this learning signal just in the context of pain, not in a placebo analgesic paradigm. So this hasn't really been done before. And I believe that expecting a low pain will reduce a laser FRM, so the learning signal in response to a laser, and this will be an effect that's stronger with a laser than an electric stimulator, and that's because the placebo effect works much better in a laser stimulator than an electric one. And then finally, once I've kind of done the preparatory work, I want to look at the FRN under placebo itself. So my hypothesis for this is that FRN will be reduced in placebo, so something is happening to reduce that learning signal. And then finally, I want to investigate the parameters of this effect. So I believe that a higher confidence in placebo will translate to a stronger reduction of FRN and a better placebo effect. So what benefit will this have for us? Well, this can tell us what our predictions about pain can be altered with placebo interventions. We make predictions about this aversive stimulus, and somehow this can be interrupted by changing expectations. And if I can show that FRN does signal salience, then this suggests that placebo analgesia is actually because you're attributing less salience to the pain, you're less worried about it. And this can actually lead us on to think, well, actually, how much of the sensory signal is pain, and actually how much of it is just about motivational salience and getting you out of that bad situation. Some applications of this. So this would really show us how internally driven our experiences are, and actually our perceptions are so much based on expectation. If we can harness this for cognitive and pain therapy, it would be a really useful tool to improve outcomes. And if we can identify FRN as a biomarker for the placebo effect, then it means that we may be able to predict individual responses to placebo analgesia in future and improve treatments. Okay, so I just want to thank my supervisors and also any participants in my study so far.
Do you have any questions for Emily?
I was wondering, two things actually. One, concerning the FRN itself, the signal which you observe. brain regions or neural correlates which are thought to underlie this signal on the EEG.
Okay, so it's not a very simple answer. There are kind of huge variation of brain regions that are involved, but on a basic level, it's kind of the prefrontal cortex signaling to the anterior cingulate cortex, and it's the anterior cingulate cortex which updates our expectations.
Okay, and the other question I have pertains to your baseline measures of including the patients or participants in your study. What are your exclusion criteria? So you can imagine that, for instance, high blood pressure or other conditions which make people more stressed or seem to be more stressed change their perception of pain perceivably.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And within pain studies, you certainly have to have some kind of exclusion criteria. You can even actually measure personality traits and see how they actually correlate with your effect. In the study that I'm doing now, I'm focusing more on the learning signal. So I'm asking for participants under the age of 35 because the learning signal actually starts to change after that, and just no substantial psychiatric or neurological history, basically.
Good.
I'm wondering, is there any truth to like when people say like that they have a higher or lower threshold for pain, and would that phenomenon, I guess, affect what your EEG will pick up for individuals, or would it affect your result?
So people do vary in how they kind of experience pain, but that's actually that's a really good question, because it's not just about the physiological response to a pain stimulus. Like, it's about your emotional interpretation of the pain, and it's about, like I said, the assailants you attribute to this, and you really can't control that between people because it very much depends on what's happened to them throughout their entire lives. But people do have a differing threshold of pain. I guess if you studied a large number of people and you looked across them, then that would kind of account for that.
May I also use a self-reported measure for that?
For pain threshold? Yeah, I'm sure you could, yeah. But the thing is, when you actually run a pain experiment, at the start of the experiment, you customize the pain intensity to that person.
Okay.
They mark it 7 out of 10.
Yeah, so you give them like differing concentrations of pain and then say, what do you stick to this one, and then you pick that one up.
I was wondering about when you have you recruited any participants?
So I'm kind of about halfway through my first year study.
Did you have any problems with recruiting people? Because if you're interested in me, the real goal is in that the real goal is pain. I'd be like, no, I'm not doing it.
Oh
So
yeah.
I wondered if you had difficulty recruiting people.
So I haven't started on the pain study yet, that will be after Christmas. But I think with my first study that's also a problem because I'm actually kind of administering tasting liquids, like pleasant sweet tasting liquids and bitter tasting liquids to people over a long period of time, but actually I haven't had any problems so far.
Right.
Yeah.
And then with the ethics involved, we have to debrief them afterwards and tell them that, explain surgically to them about how you have, because you know the change in the pain threshold.
Oh,
That's what you do,
yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think if a participant wants to be debriefed, then yeah, you would do